This is why Oda will never reveal Nami's true history, despite the fact that he is well aware of it and was at one point ready and willing to implement it before taking his finger off the story trigger at the very last second and deciding to leave Nami's extended story untold. However, in the process, he did kind of semi-tell it, and from what we know, Nami actually has one of the more tragic backstories in One Piece. And when I say that, I mean even more tragic than what we saw with Bell-mère and Arlong. For decades now, Eiichiro Oda has been smouging it up. He has been sitting on a big story treasure that he refuses to reveal to us. And all we currently know is that Nami was found as a baby within the then recently ravaged and destroyed Oikot Kingdom in East Blue. Oikot, by the way, is Tokyo backwards, so it was likely a kingdom of some prominence to be named after Japan's capital city. Or at least that's what I originally thought, foolishly so. Apparently in Japanese, Oikot is a term used to mean not Tokyo, and it often illustrates a lifestyle completely the opposite of Tokyo, one with more rural charms, less expensive and less stressful than living in the city. So with that in mind, Oikot was probably just another one of those peaceful-ish areas of East Blue. It's never really been expanded upon beyond that for reasons that we'll get to. But interestingly, in the One Piece live action series, we actually have a blink and you'll miss it shot of Nami looking at a map of the Oikot Kingdom with some notable figures on the left, perhaps royalty, perhaps Nami relatives, perhaps both of the things it is I just said. And the island itself seems to be in the shape of a big sea serpent monster, which is pretty cool. But baby Nami was found by Child Nojiko, and the two of them were found by Bell-mère, with the three of them going on to form a found family. But what we never learned is who Nami's biological parents were. And usually I'd shrug that off as not important in this particular series. Who cares? It's about found family. But on this occasion, there are two things. One is that, as stated, Oda does know this information and he was once planning on revealing it. And secondly, whether it's relevant to them or not, the vast majority, if not every Straw Hat, does seem to have notable biological or inherited lineage. For example, Zoro is the descendant of Ryuma, Usopp is potentially the descendant of Noland, and if not, still the son of Yasop. That's pretty good. Sanji is the prince of a prominent kingdom. Robin is the last survivor of a civilization who could read the ancient language, and to get into the sheer nepotistic mess that is Monkey D. Luffy would take up the rest of this video. All of this is to say that this crew, they were not a series of people who met by chance. Each and every one of them was fated to be brought together, because they all have their own special contribution to make to the dawn of the world, and also to fulfill that legacy of the past. And Nami, of course, has an innate special ability to navigate the most dangerous weather conditions on the planet, part of which was honed during her time with Arlong, as she had to quite literally sink or swim as a child to gather enough money to buy her village back. But more so than most, the word talent applies to Nami. When it comes to navigation, she has something, a thing that cannot be taught, which points us in the general direction of her true lineage. All of which was meant to be revealed in One Piece Movie 10, Strong World. However, there's quite a backstory to this and why it never happened. Strong World was the very first One Piece movie that Eiichiro Oda was personally involved in. And this came after a relentless barrage of requests for Oda to write the film because the One Piece movies at the time were in a bit of a death spiral. To give you some idea, the executive producer of Strong World said the following: "I want the next movie we make to bring back the staff's morale and make it something that gives One Piece a fresh start." That's how bad of a place the One Piece film series was in. It needed a huge change. And so Eiichiro Oda accepted the task and got to work, and part of the One Piece movie revival plan was to stand out by introducing canon elements. The best known of which being the main antagonist of the film, Golden Lion Shiki, a legendary figure in the manga, as he was once a former member of the Rocks Pirates, a villain who Oda had planned on using for his own arc in the manga before ultimately settling on implementing Shiki in this film. But there was a lesser known canon element that was originally going to be inserted into Strong World, and it's lesser known because Oda decided to cut it. In 2016, Oda stated that the initial plot of Strong World was intended to dig into the secret of Nami's birth, and that the planned content of the film had genuinely shocked all of the staff who had read the early draft of the script. The initial film wasn't even titled Strong World, it was titled The Crystal Ship's Log. And it was a surprisingly dramatic script because Oda thought that what the studio wanted of him was a tearjerker, something to really tug on the emotional heartstrings in the same way that most One Piece arcs eventually do, which was a missing ingredient of the films up until this point. The One Piece movies had been pretty good with executing action and comedy, but mostly lackluster when it came to drama, with a few key exceptions. And that's because it's an incredibly difficult task to create that drama with a brand new character in anywhere from 40 to 90 minutes when you already have anywhere from 5 to 10 protagonists to deal with. To their credit, the movies tried, but again, there wasn't enough time to fully flesh out these new characters in a way that felt like they truly belonged in the One Piece world. Which is my personal theory as to why Nami's history was chosen for this movie, because she was already a well-established figure in One Piece. We didn't need to dedicate any time to getting to know her, and as soon as the film began, we would be ready to dive deeper with a character that we'd already formed a connection to. Honestly, as much as I dislike the idea of canon material in extended media, it does seem like a fairly solid way of making the movies worth paying money to see. However, according to an interview that Oda conducted in the Strong World art book, he went a bit overboard with the drama. When I began working on this, I started thinking about what everyone expected from me, probably something dramatic. So thinking they'd want to see a tearjerker, I wrote The Crystal Ship's Log. If it had become a movie just as it was, I think everyone would have really enjoyed it. But when I finished it, there was just something that didn't sit well with me. An emotional story is one that springs up from the life of your characters. But if a writer tries to force emotion as a goal when writing a story, you end up crushing the characters under it. It's the characters that have to make the story. So after I finished writing The Crystal Ship's Logs, thoughts started popping up like, is this really what you wanted to make? Finally, it was at a meeting for revising the scenario where I came clean to everyone and said, I think I'd like to drop this plot. Since it's a project that I decided to take on myself, I told them I wanted to make something brand new, something that would be sure to entertain boys, and that was enough to convince them, which essentially meant that Oda wanted to reduce the heart of the film and amp up the action and adventure for the boys. And you can even tell this directly from the title change. The original title, The Crystal Ship's Log, suggests a more historical tale, whereas the eventual title, Strong World, is very blatant in its promise of high quality action for the target demographic of, again, the boys. And ever since this was discovered by the Western fan base, there has been this sense of having been robbed of Nami's backstory in favor of some more punch fighting. Like, which of these would you rather have? The complete history of Nami or Zoro fighting a fart clown? Because what we got was the latter. And we've got more than just interviews to see what it is we missed out on. Because this tonal change was made, I would say, quite late in the process for an animated film. And in fact, the very first teaser trailer for One Piece Strong World wasn't even for Strong World. It was for The Crystal Ship's Log, because at the time that was still the name of the movie and the plot they were covering. This trailer is quite the historical artifact. It's absolutely impossible to find in any sort of decent quality, at least not with an English translation. And the only reason I even know about it is because I remember watching it at the time it was released, because I am old. And to take you through what happens, we see shots of Sengoku, Garp, Whitebeard, and Shanks, each commenting on the return of Golden Lion Shiki, something that would also never actually happen in the film, because no one except the Straw Hats were aware of Shiki's presence. But there are two very interesting shots in this here teaser trailer. The first is a very solemn looking Nami leaving the Thousand Sunny dressed in her formal wear, which is followed by seeing a letter that she's left on the table. And if you zoom in on that letter, you can even see that it's marked by a tangerine, effectively Nami's signature. So this is extremely different from what Strong World ended up being, where Nami did still leave the crew, but she did so because Shiki forced her. And then she left the Straw Hats a message on a tone dial asking them to come save her. However, in the Crystal Ship's Log teaser trailer, Nami looks like she's leaving the crew of her own volition. And the way that she's marked and prepared the letter shows that this is a premeditated move, and that there's something clearly very wrong happening here. Something more along the lines of when Sanji left the crew on Zou, which was of course linked to his horrible history as a prince of the Germa Kingdom. The rest of the teaser shows the Straw Hats invading Shiki's hideout exactly like they did in the final film, and it ends with a promise that the Crystal Ship's Log would be opening soon. And given that it was strongly connected to Nami, I think a solid assumption is that the Crystal Ship was a vessel of the past, one that may have carried baby Nami and made mention of her in its log. So here's a pretty horrifying possibility. The Crystal Ship could have been the vessel of the pirate crew who attacked the Oikot Kingdom, and Nami's parents could have been part of the raid that killed Nojiko's family, as well as left Belle-Mère on the verge of death and without the will to live. That would be a pretty hard emotional reckoning for Nami, to know that her parents were responsible for that, and then we have to talk about Shiki. Whether this is still true or not is very up in the air, but when this film was written, Nami's past was intrinsically linked to Golden Lion Shiki. As the main antagonist of the Nami-focused movie, he was either going to be another Arlong-like figure to her, or perhaps even flat out Nami's father. So as far as the timeline goes, Shiki escaped from Impel Down 22 years ago, and Nami was born 20 years ago, which is the same year that the Oikot Kingdom was attacked. So there's definitely space to make a bit of a baby there, and we do know that Shiki was specifically fixated on East Blue. His plan was to destroy East Blue because he felt that Roger's life ending in this sea was pathetic, humiliating, and a general insult to a man of his strength. In the final Strong World film, Shiki does also continuously refer to Nami as baby, or more accurately, Baby-chan. Although this is more of a lecherous old man kind of gag. I would be very, very surprised if Oda had ever intended Shiki to be Nami's father, considering how perpetually bricked up he seems to be over her. So it's possible that Nami was also the child of one of his crewmates, and that there could be some Rocks Pirates legacy floating around in there somewhere. And that might be why Shiki originally targeted Nami. In Strong World, Shiki wanted Nami for her ability to navigate, which he discovers more or or less incidentally as she warns him of a coming storm that he couldn't predict. However, in the Crystal Ship's log, I highly suspect that Shiki either already knew about Nami or found out about her some other way and then deliberately targeted her. One scenario could be that Shiki himself found the Crystal Ship and its log, perhaps a legendary vessel housing a world-famous navigator. However, in the past, something went wrong and everyone except for Nami died, and the Crystal Ship's log told of a child of this world-famous navigator, someone who Shiki would then seek out to help complete his plan. And it could also be a lot more brutal than that. Shiki himself could have deliberately killed Nami's parents and only later on discovered that they had a child. Whatever it was going to be, this was going to be the same sort of level as hard-hitting as the best flashbacks in the series, like Robin, like Lauren, you know what, even like Nami's first flashback. Remember that Oda's original goal was to make the audience cry, and that just reading this backstory shocked all of the film staff. So I can't help but feel like we missed out on something special here. Something that probably won't ever come to light in the original manga. Funnily enough though, One Piece film Gold explored more of Nami's backstory than Strongwell did, briefly detailing her relationship with fellow thief Kurina, although unlike elements of Strongworld, none of this is canon. In One Piece Gold Backstage Pass, Eiichiro Oda was asked the following: "Did you have any intention to show Nami's past in this film?" And Oda replied, "No, that's what Mr. Kuroiwa, the scriptwriter, thought about, so I just allowed it. I only told him to not overdo the character. Maybe he thought of Kurina as a character that resembles Nami. Mr. Kuroiwa was also the one who created both Kurina and Mad Treasure, so no, it wasn't in my plan at all. I've also thought of a completely different past story for Nami. Of course, Nami's real parent story is too much." Which sounds like Oda ruminating on his experience of making One Piece Strongworld, because that's exactly what he tried to do then, and discovered, it's too much. Oda did his best to make a Nami's real parent story, and it just didn't feel right. Not only for the target demographic, but Oda also spoke about the dangers of forcing emotion and having that end up crushing the characters. So it seems to me like Nami discovering the story of her birth may actually be a detriment to the character rather than an addition of depth. It's really hard to make a judgment on that from where I stand. I mean, just not knowing what Oda had in mind makes me endlessly curious. But history will show that he definitely made the right decision in terms of the Strongworld film at least, because it's not one of the most highly regarded now, but at the time it was a groundbreaking entry into the franchise that not only revived the One Piece movies, but also catapulted the anime and the manga into a whole new sphere of success. And what's interesting is that I can't help but feel like we would eventually go back to the idea of a more emotional film with One Piece Film Red. Uta's past is that kind of truly horrific experience that may have been intended for Nami, and people do cry at the end of that movie with Uta's implied fate, although I doubt that was ever on the cards for Nami. But when it comes to biological family in One Piece, this is my philosophy. It only matters if the characters themselves care. Biological family matters a lot to Sanji, for example, because he spent his whole life trying to separate himself from them. Whereas in the case of Zoro, his blood relations don't matter at all, even if it's a legendary samurai, because Zoro doesn't care about it one way or the other. And with Nami, I would say that she's more on the Zoro side of the spectrum. To Nami, the only family she's ever known has been Nojiko and Belmer. And if she doesn't care about her past beyond that, then neither should I. And even though we've potentially missed out on a hard-hitting, fully fleshed out Nami backstory, I don't know how much it could have added to her character. I think it would definitely be a point of interest in a handful of videos made by strange men on the internet, but nothing substantive worth taking that time to explore and, more importantly, endure, because it was not gonna be a pleasant story. Although we should also be aware that this unpleasant story does exist in the mind of Eiichiro Oda, as well as everyone else who read that first draft of the Crystal Ship's log, and even though we're now in the final saga of One Piece, it could still be implemented if Oda saw fit.